They used my cards for a fancy dinner and blocked me from the restaurant. I called the bank while they were mid-meal. I walked up to the tall glass doors of the Skyview, the kind of restaurant that looked down on the city like it owned the night. The autumn wind brushed against the edges of my vintage ivory dress, the one Kay gave me on our first date 50 years ago. It was fragile now, threadbare in places, but it had survived love, loss, and time longer than most people ever do. Through the glass, the chandeliers shimmered like caged constellations. I could see my reflection between them, an old woman standing too straight to be invisible, clutching a small purse like a memory she wasn't ready to let go of. I adjusted the pearl necklace that Kay once fastened around my neck and heard his voice again. You deserve a world that listens when you speak. No one had listened in a long time. I stepped toward the hostess stand, the click of my sensible shoes almost drowned by the laughter coming from inside. And then I heard it, my son's voice, sharp and amused, slicing through the air like broken glass. Mother, Jason sneered, are you wearing trash again? Maybe I should design a dog outfit for you. It'd look better than whatever you've got on now. Laughter followed, brittle and cruel. It belonged to Crystal, my daughter-in-law, who had a way of making mockery sound like a compliment. She leaned on Jason's arm. Her perfume was so thick it left no room for forgiveness. I never thought you'd still cling to that sad old dress, she said, her lips curving upward. It's older than your stories. I felt my stomach twist, but I refused to let my voice shake. Jason, I said quietly, you used my card to reserve this table, didn't you? He threw his head back and laughed, a sound that used to mean joy, but now meant arrogance. You really think we'd do anything for you? The money you made wasn't meant for you. Who else is it for? Old man Jake next door? You want us gone because you're sleeping with him? Don't dream in daylight anymore. The words struck like stones, but not because they were cruel, because they came from my own child. The boy who once brought me daisies after Kay's funeral now looked at me like I was something he had to scrape off his shoe. Crystal tilted her head, pretending pity. Don't be so hard on her, Jason, she said softly. She's just lonely. It must be difficult watching someone like Jake move on while she's still dressing like it's 1970. I turned to her, my voice even. At least I kept what I loved alive, Crystal. Some people lose everything and pretend it's style. For a fleeting moment, she looked startled, then the sneer returned. The hostess, young and nervous, looked between us. I'm so sorry, ma'am, she said, glancing at the reservation list. Your name isn't here. The Harlow party is already seated. I blinked. Already seated? Yes, ma'am. Table for 3. I followed her gaze through the room. There they were, Jason, Crystal, and Aiden seated near the window, laughing, glasses raised under the golden glow of the chandeliers. When I took a step forward, the doorman gently blocked me. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said, polite but firm. They asked that no one else join the table. For a second, my body forgot how to breathe. My family, my blood. Laughing, eating, drinking on the money I had earned through decades of labor, of papers graded until my fingers cramped, of nights spent making sure Jason had a future he now used to humiliate me. Through the glass, I saw my grandson Aiden lift his phone, filming them as they smiled into the camera. A perfect family, curated for strangers. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the cool silver of the necklace Kay had given me. I could almost hear him again. If they forget kindness, Gloria, remind them where they came from. Inside, Jason leaned close to Crystal and whispered something. She laughed too loudly. It wasn't laughter, it was cruelty wearing diamonds. The hostess hesitated. Would you like me to call them, ma'am? I shook my head. No, I said softly. They've made themselves clear. The night wind pushed against the glass as I stepped back onto the sidewalk. The city around me buzzed with its usual indifference, sirens, taxis, chatter, but the world had never sounded quieter. My heart was steady now, not broken, just resolved. They thought I would stand there and take it. They thought I would bow my head like always, but they had forgotten one thing. I was the woman who taught them how to stand tall. I walked to the corner bench just across the street. The air smelled faintly of rain and roasted garlic drifting from the restaurant vents. I set my purse on my lap and opened it. Inside was my phone, screen glowing softly like a waiting verdict. My fingers trembled, not with fear, but with clarity. The number was already saved. I had memorized it long ago, the emergency line to my bank. But I didn't press it yet. Not yet. I wanted them to start their feast first. Across the street, I watched through the wide glass windows as waiters set their plates down. Jason's steak gleamed under the light. Crystal twirled her pink drink. Aiden kept filming, his small smile tight, uncertain. 42 minutes after they were seated, I was still watching from across the street. The butter melted across the bread, the wine poured, the laughter rose. That was when I pressed the green button. "This is Gloria Harlow," I said when the voice came on the line, calm and clear. "My card is being used at the Skyview restaurant without my consent. Please block all current and future transactions and flag the account for fraud." There was a pause, a heartbeat of silence before the woman replied, "Yes, ma'am, right away." I ended the call and looked up. Inside, I saw a waitress approach the table with the check. Jason handed over the sleek black card, my card, with a smirk. He gestured toward Crystal, probably bragging about how generous he was. Then, the machine beeped red. Declined. Jason laughed awkwardly, waved his hand, tried again. Declined. The waitress frowned, called for the manager. The lights from the chandelier reflected off Crystal's face, draining it of all color. Jason's hands moved faster, his mouth sharper. He was arguing. The manager pointed to the name on the card. Jason's jaw clenched. Aiden lowered his phone and looked toward the window. His eyes found me. He didn't wave. He just watched. Justice doesn't need to shout it, just needs to arrive on time. Inside, the chaos unfolded like a play I no longer had a role in. Crystal's composure cracked first, then Jason's voice rose, desperate and angry. I stood where I was, letting the night wind move through my hair like a silent applause. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far and far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. Jason was shouting now. The manager remained calm, gesturing toward the office phone, explaining procedures. I could read the lips of my son, forming my name again and again. My mother, as though I were a shield he could raise after years of beating it down. But I was done being a shield. I turned my phone face down, the screen dimming like a candle that had done its job. For a long moment, I simply stood there, watching the scene fade behind the glass. Then I smiled a small, quiet smile that wasn't about victory, but release. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, catching on the hem of my dress. I thought of Kay again, of how he once told me I looked like the moon pretending to be human. Maybe tonight, he'd be proud. Maybe he'd say, I finally remembered how to shine. I took one deep breath, the kind that fills your lungs with new beginnings, and whispered to no one in particular. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just presses send. Then I turned and walked away from the window, the autumn wind following me like an old friend. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel small or ashamed. I felt free. I used to be a literature teacher, strict, they said. Fair, I believed. My classroom was a place of structure and sharp pencils, a world where every essay mattered and every word carried weight. I gave my students the discipline I thought would guide them through life, even if it made me unpopular. Jason used to come home fuming when his friends joked about me being the red pen queen. But it wasn't until his senior year that the first real crack appeared. He plagiarized a paper. I did not report him, though I should have. Instead, I went to his principal, pleaded for leniency. Jason got to graduate, but he never forgave me. He said I embarrassed him. You made me look weak, he said, like I couldn't fight my own battles. I wanted to protect him. But that was the moment he stopped seeing me as a shield and started seeing me as a prison. Crystal had once sat in the back row of my class, chewing gum, turning in essays copied straight from online forums. I failed her, and she carried that bitterness for years. When she married Jason, it was as if she finally found a way to even the score. She never loved anything but her red ink, she told Jason once when she thought I was not listening. You think she loves you? She only loves control. The seed was planted. Jason clung to it. Over the years, he rewrote his entire childhood in that narrative. A mother who only cared about grades, a home without warmth. A woman who never said, "I'm proud of you," even though I did. Many times perhaps, just not when he wanted it most. But there was one more thorn in their side. Jake. Jake lived 2 doors down. He lost his wife to a car crash. I lost Kay to a steel factory collapse. We never planned to fall into conversation, but it happened. First over hedges, then over cups of chamomile. He brought me muffins, helped fix my porch light, recommended books I'd long forgotten. To me, Jake was a kind voice in a house that had grown too silent. But Jason hated him. "Are you replacing Dad with that old man?" he once shouted, slamming the door. "What's next? Moving him into Dad's room?" I looked him in the eye and said quietly, "I have never replaced anyone, but I've learned to value people who make me feel seen." Jason said nothing, but the way he stormed out said more than words. I never once introduced Jake as anything but a neighbor, but I suppose, when bitterness festers, even kindness becomes a threat. It started with a pair of theater tickets I never bought. I found the charge buried in my monthly statement. Broadway Regal 2 premium seats, $286. I had not been to a show in 3 years. I thought perhaps it was a mistake. But then came the next entry. Le Papillon Spa Couples Package, $412. That was no mistake. Nor was the steakhouse in Midtown, or the designer clothing store in Soho, or the boutique wine delivery marked at $127. Each one with my name attached. My card, my money. When I brought it up over lunch that Sunday, sitting quietly across the table from Crystal while Jason scrolled his phone, she looked up with the casual cruelty I had come to recognize. "Oh, that?" she said. "You were not using the card, Gloria. It was just sitting there. Would you rather let it die in your wallet?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Jason cut in before I could. "Mama, you need rest. That's what you always say, right? Rest, not stress. We're just handling a few things until we pay you back. Come on, don't make it a thing." He smiled like a lawyer caught mid-lie. I did not argue. Not that day. But when I returned home, I sat at my desk with a yellow legal pad and wrote down every charge, every spa trip, every filet mignon, every digital movie rental and Uber ride one by one, in pencil. It was not just a dinner, it was a pattern, a quiet siphoning, a month's worth of life I had not lived, paid for by the body. I had spent decades breaking as a teacher, waking at 5, grading past midnight, raising Jason after Kay died. They thought I did not know how to log into my own account. They thought I would forget. I did not forget. I wrote it all down. It took exactly 42 minutes for their entrees to arrive, and I know that because I watched the kitchen door open and close like a metronome, while the city wind pressed the scent of roasted garlic and seared meat through the gap in the revolving door, and because an old woman who has been ignored long enough learns to measure time by other people's appetites. I stood across the street, tucked in the shadow of a flower kiosk that was closing for the night, the vendor stacking buckets of leftover chrysanthemums, and I could see Jason's hands cutting the air as he performed for Crystal, could see the way he leaned back whenever he felt admired, the way he touched the rim of his glass as if applause lived there, and I could see Aiden with his phone tilted toward them, capturing angles that made them look richer, kinder, younger than the truth would allow. Jason ordered steak because he always ordered steak when he wanted to feel important, the kind of order men place when they are sure the check belongs to someone else. Crystal sipped something pink and sparkling, that performative drink women choose when they need their cruelty to look festive. Aiden kept glancing at the live chat, smirking at comments, and yet his eyes, when he forgot the camera was on, fell to the napkin in his lap like a child who still knows right from wrong. Inside the window, I watched the butter melt across their plates, and I remembered the way melted butter used to run into the cracks of the cornbread Kay loved. And I let that memory sit beside me like a friend who doesn't need to speak. I looked down at the screen in my hand and saw the number already dialed, the green button waiting like a small, patient door. My finger hovered for a moment, because the first act of refusing to be erased is always the hardest. Not because you doubt the truth, but because you have trained yourself to carry it quietly. The night air tugged the hem of my dress, the one Kay gave me on our first date, when the city felt like a promise and not a punishment. Then I pressed the button and lifted the phone to my ear and matched my breath to the ring. "This is Gloria Harlow," I said when the voice came on, calm and steady like a nurse calling a name from a waiting room. "My card is being used at the Skyview restaurant without my consent. Please block all activity and flag the account for fraud." And I listened to the small pause on the other end before the soft reply, "Yes, ma'am," right away. And I felt the strange mercy of being believed by a stranger when your own blood has made a spectacle of your doubt. Across the street, a waitress returned with the check and the performance continued. Jason produced the sleek black card, my card, with a flourish, the way a magician reveals a trick he thinks the audience will never understand. And I saw the moment the machine beeped red and the mask cracked. Declined is a quiet word when a machine says it, but a very loud word when a room hears it. He laughed first, that thin, brittle laugh people use to negotiate with fate. And he tried again and again, and still, the small red light blinked back no. And then the manager arrived, and the questions arrived with him like a checklist for the truth names, birth dates, ID, ownership. And I watched Crystal's face drain beneath the lighting that was designed to be kind to wealth but not to lies, and I saw Jason's hands begin to lose their choreography. Aiden pulled his phone to his chest as if hiding a confession, stood up, stepped away from the table, and then bolted through the front door. On the sidewalk, he looked up and saw me, and his feet halted the way feet do when the heart recognizes home. He did not wave because it is hard to wave at the map you've been pretending you couldn't read. He just walked, and the door sighed shut behind him. Inside, Crystal began directing her anger at the nearest employee because power borrowed from other people's money has nowhere else to go when the borrowing stops. I stayed where I was because I had learned long ago that a woman does not need to enter a room to change it. Justice is not loud, it is precise, and if you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far and far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. Now let me tell you what precision looks like when it finally learns your name. The manager asked to see identification for the cardholder, and Jason tried to make his voice deeper, tried to make his words into a wall, tried to throw my name like a rope across a pit he dug himself, but the rope kept snapping. Crystal turned to charm, then to pity, then to tears, moving through strategies the way some people change earrings, and none of it altered the math. The manager pointed to the signature panel. My signature? The particular curve of the G I taught myself when I was 9, because I wanted letters that looked like they knew where they were going. And Jason stared at it as if the G might suddenly confess to being his. The manager's hand hovered, then lowered. A second server came over with a small clipboard, the kind that never arrives for the innocent. And the room, which had been designed to hum pleasantly above the sound of credit, learned how to hum around the sound of consequence. I stepped back from the window and let the reflection swallow me, so that I no longer had to watch the contortions of a man trying to outrun a fact. A taxi idled at the curb, and the driver leaned over to shake ash into the gutter and asked if I needed a ride, and I said not yet. And in the glass, I could see a ghost of myself, ivory dress, small purse, shoulders square, and I remembered the first time I taught Jason to cross a street, how he gripped my fingers and trusted the timing of my steps. Trust is a currency too, and when you spend it against a person's will, the debt arrives with interest. When the call ended, I stood very still, letting the cold slip under the collar of the dress and remind me that I still had a body, that I was not just a narrative other people felt entitled to write. I watched 2 women leaving the restaurant link arms and laugh at something private and kind. I watched the flower vendor hand a few bruised stems to a homeless man who thanked him as if he had been offered spring. I thought of Kay, of how he used to clip recipes from magazines and leave them taped to the fridge with notes like, "Tuesday?" written in his careful block letters, and I thought of the way grief rehearses you for moments like this, teaches you how to stand upright in the middle of a loss and call it weather. I was not done. The freeze was a tourniquet, not the cure, and a wound stops bleeding before it starts healing. I walked home with the city's steam lifting from the grates, and the train clattering beneath my feet, and the neon making saints out of strangers. At my table, I opened the old laptop, the one with the sticker Aiden gave me years ago that says "Read more." And I found the voice memo I had recorded the night before when Jason came by the house and mistook me for a wall. I trimmed it to a clean, cruel minute, the accusation about Jake, the laughter, the entitlement poured into the shape of my name, and I listened once, not because I needed the reminder, but because courage likes proof. Then I attached the file to an email addressed to Susan, a former colleague who once covered my seniors' poetry readings for the local paper and now produces stories at the station that makes the Midwest listen to itself. In the subject line, I wrote just one word: verification, because I was not interested in spectacle. I was interested in evidence. In the body of the message, I typed the date, the time, the place, the last 4 digits of the card, the account note from the bank, and the fact that the recording was my own, obtained lawfully, and I signed it simply, Gloria still not done writing. Because that is what a teacher says when the lesson has reached the chapter where the students finally realize they were the subject all along. For a moment I hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of awe. How strange it was, after 80 years of being dismissed, to finally hold a button that could make the truth louder than every lie ever told about me. Before I hit send, I paused long enough to hear the house breathe. An old clock in the living room ticked with the stubbornness I admire in clocks. The refrigerator hummed like a tired friend. The porch light I forgot to replace flickered and went out, and I made a note to ask Jake about it in the morning, because love that arrives after ruin tends to carry a toolbox. Then I clicked send and watched the little paper airplane icon fly across the screen, as if even software enjoys a good exit line. I poured tea and sat in the dark without turning on a single lamp, not because I was hiding, but because some victories deserve to be measured first by the quiet they create. I imagined the manager at the Skyview filing his incident report with the clean, brief sentences that protect people who choose the rules over the rich. I imagined Crystal practicing the shape of an apology in the mirror and then choosing a different shape. I imagined Jason walking to the car, looking at the steering wheel, realizing there is no key that starts a life you have spent years insisting belongs to someone else. Around midnight, the phone buzzed with messages I did not open. Around 1, the wind picked up and set the maple tree against the siding, like knuckles knocking to remind me that the world is larger than a table for 3. Around 2, I finally slept, not because the night forgave me, but because I forgave the night for taking so long. In the morning, the sun pushed its way through the curtains as if it had a reservation, and the kettle whistled, and I remembered that breakfast is a form of faith. I buttered toast, wrote down the time of each transaction from the last month, logged the reference number from the bank into my notebook, and underlined it twice. Then I set the pen down, folded my hands, and let the stillness settle like a verdict. What they did not understand, what people who mistake quiet for consent never understand, is that precision is patient. It waits in ledger lines and timestamps and signatures. It waits in the reason a manager keeps a photocopy. It waits in a bank's recorded call center audio. It waits in the small red light of a declined transaction. And when it arrives, it does not shout. It simply stands where you told it to stand and says, "Here is what happened." And the room has to arrange itself around that sentence. I was not angry anymore. I was arranging the room. When I finally stepped onto the porch, the air smelled like wet concrete and survival. The neighbor's dog barked twice, and then, recognizing me, wagged its tail, as if to remind me that some loyalties do not need proof. I waved to the mailman, whose kindness is the kind that never asks for a witness. I watched a sparrow land on the railing and shake rain from its feathers with the dignity that belongs to things that refuse to be decorative. Then I went back inside, opened the curtains wide, and sat at the table to wait for the day to learn my name, the way the night just had. The next morning, Jason came to my house unannounced. He didn't knock, just barged in like a storm that believed it owned the sky. His face was red, his tie crooked, his words already sharpened like knives. "You humiliated us," he shouted. "Do you have any idea what you did last night? They called me a thief in front of everyone. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my notebook open, writing in the same calm hand that had once graded his essays. I closed it gently and looked up. "I didn't call you a thief, Jason," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I just let the truth show its face." He slammed his fist against the counter, the sound echoing like thunder in the small room. My cup rattled. The coffee trembled, but didn't spill, unlike his control. "You made me lose my scholarship. You made me lose my reputation. And now you've made me lose my career. You've always needed to be right, even when it ruined me." His words carried the weight of years-old resentment, never truth. It wasn't the first time I'd heard him rewrite the past to suit his pain. I watched him, this grown man with the same eyes that once looked up at me for comfort after nightmares. Before I could answer, I heard the clicking of heels in the hallway. Crystal appeared in the doorway, mascara smeared, still wearing last night's earrings and perfume that smelled too expensive to have been bought with her own money. "You think this is justice?" she hissed. "You humiliated us in front of my clients because you couldn't stand that your son married me. You've hated me since the day I walked into your class." I turned to face her. "You failed that essay because you copied it word for word from a published paper, Crystal. I didn't hate you. I pitied you." Her lips trembled, but she didn't back down. "You destroyed my chances at college. You made me the joke of the whole school. You made me small." Jason moved closer, his voice low and full of venom. "You never forgave her for being everything you weren't: beautiful, confident, admired. That's why you punished her." I laughed softly, not out of joy, but disbelief. "Jason," I said, "I punished dishonesty, not youth. And if beauty is all it takes to blind you, then you've been walking in the dark for a very long time." Crystal's eyes filled with tears, though I couldn't tell if they were real or rehearsed. Jason looked ready to break something, his fist clenched, his pride collapsing. "You've always had to make yourself the hero," he spat. "You're incapable of being wrong, even now, when you've turned the whole world against us." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He mistook silence for weakness when it was actually grace. From the hallway came a small, trembling voice. "Dad?" We all turned. Aiden stood there in his pajamas, hair sticking up like a question mark, eyes wide but not frightened, just disappointed. Jason's tone changed instantly, sharp and commanding. "Go to your room. This isn't your business." But Aiden didn't move. He looked at me, then at them, and then back at me again. "Grandma's the only one who asks me what I like to eat," he said softly. "You never ask, you just tell." Jason's jaw tightened. "Aiden," I said. "No!" Aiden shouted, his small voice cracking through the room like lightning through glass. "You said Grandma was crazy. You said she was making things up, but I saw you use her card. I saw you laugh when she called." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Even the ticking clock seemed to stop to listen. Crystal blinked fast, her voice trembling. "Aiden, sweetie, you don't understand." But he cut her off with the calm certainty of truth. "Yes, I do. You lied." Jason took a slow step back. For the first time since he walked in, his face drained of color. The bluster deflated, leaving only a hollow man standing where my son used to be. I looked at my grandson, really looked at him, the defiance in his chin, the tremor in his small hands, the courage it took for a child to stand up against the people who were supposed to protect him. "You told me the time of the dinner, didn't you?" I asked softly. He hesitated, then nodded once. "I wanted you to see them," he whispered. "I wanted everyone to see." And there it was, the truth, pure and fragile, standing barefoot in my kitchen. Crystal turned away, her painted face cracking under the weight of exposure. Jason muttered something under his breath, a string of curses that fell apart halfway through. He had no words left that could rewrite what his son had just said. I reached for Aiden's hand. It was warm and shaking. "Thank you," I said, and my voice broke, not from weakness but pride. He looked up at me, eyes wet but shining. "They told me not to talk to you anymore," he whispered. "They said you were mean." I smiled, the kind of smile that comes after a long war. Then maybe they were afraid of kindness. Jason turned sharply, grabbed his jacket from the chair, and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. Crystal lingered for a second, staring at me like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find a sentence that would make sense anymore. Then she followed him, her heels clicking like the echo of a mistake. The car engine roared outside, fading into the distance, leaving behind only quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't suffocate but heals. Aiden stood there, small and brave, looking around the house as if he were seeing it for the first time. "Can I stay here for a while?" he asked. I brushed a hand through his messy hair. "For as long as you need." He smiled, a tiny, tentative smile that reminded me of the boy Jason once was before resentment took root in him. We sat at the table together. I poured him some milk, and he reached for my notebook. "What do you write in here, Grandma?" "Memories," I said. "And sometimes the things people think I'll forget." He nodded thoughtfully. "Can I write something too?" "Of course." He took the pen and scribbled slowly, tongue between his teeth. When he was done, he pushed it toward me. In small, uneven letters, he had written, "Truth wins." I felt tears sting my eyes. I closed the notebook and pressed it to my chest. That afternoon, we made pancakes. We listened to the rain, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel like the villain in someone else's story. I felt like the author again, finally holding the pen. I did not expect the story to leave my kitchen. I thought the humiliation, the shouting, the pain would stay trapped within those four walls, between the clinking of Crystal's bracelets and the echo of Jason's anger. But by Monday morning, it was everywhere. Someone at the restaurant, probably a young waiter with more conscience than experience, had filmed the scene. Jason, red-faced, shouting at the manager. Crystal, waving her hands, pretending to be the victim. The staff, confused but firm, asking to verify the cardholder's name. And through the large glass window, for a fleeting second, the camera caught me standing outside, an old woman in an ivory dress, clutching her purse, quiet, uninvited, invisible. The caption beneath the video read simply, "Old lady pays for dinner, gets blocked." By noon, it had 500,000 views. By sunset, it passed 1 million. And by the next morning, 3 million people had seen it. People online called me many things. The forgotten grandmother, the quiet fighter, the woman who finally said enough. They debated whether it was staged, analyzed every frame, slowed down the footage to catch my expression in the window. But in the comments buried beneath the noise, there was one phrase that kept appearing. "She didn't deserve that." That was all I ever wanted someone to say. By Tuesday, the local paper knocked on my door. The journalist was young, polite, nervous, holding a notepad like a shield. "Mrs. Harlow," she said, "we'd like to hear your side of the story." I made her tea and gave her oatmeal cookies. When she asked how I felt about what had happened, I didn't give a speech. I just said, "I don't need them to love me. I just need them to stop stepping on me." She wrote it down, word for word. The next morning, my face lined, tired, but unbroken, was on the front page beside that quote. The headline read, "She stopped being silent." I didn't know that sentence would set off a storm. Within 2 days, news vans lined the street. Reporters from 3 different channels asked for interviews. Someone even offered to buy my old ivory dress for charity. I declined. That dress wasn't for sale, it was memory, not merchandise. And then came the real earthquake, the investigations. It started quietly. A rumor, a whisper that someone had filed a report about Jason's financial activities. Then one morning, I saw it on the news ticker at the bottom of the television screen. Local businessman under IRS review after viral video. Every account tied to his name was frozen. His employer suspended him pending internal audit. Every client gift, every expense report, every so-called loan payment he'd bragged about, it all traced back to my credit line. The irony was delicious. For years, he'd called me forgetful, and yet it was he who forgot that digital footprints don't vanish. That night, Jason called 12 times. I didn't answer a single one. His voicemails were a carousel of emotions, rage, guilt, denial, pleading. I listened to none of them. The world was finally listening for me. I didn't need to respond anymore. Crystal's fall was swifter, nastier. Someone, maybe an old classmate, maybe karma itself, dug up her academic records. Screenshots of her plagiarized essay resurfaced on an alumni forum. Then, a clip appeared on social media, grainy, old, unmistakable. It was from 28 years ago. My classroom, Crystal, standing red-faced in front of her peers, screaming that I had ruined her life. I had forgotten the details, but someone had saved the tape. Now it played again for millions. Within days, her employer announced her termination for integrity issues. I read the headline online and whispered to the empty room, "Sometimes, the universe takes its time, but it never forgets." Through all of it, I stayed home. I baked bread. I watered my roses. I listened to old jazz records on the radio. Reporters still knocked, but I stopped answering. I had said what needed to be said. The world was loud enough without me adding to it. One afternoon, just as the light began to fade, I heard a small knock at the door. When I opened it, Aiden stood there, his backpack hanging low, his hair messy, eyes red like he hadn't slept. "Can I stay here, Grandma?" he asked. I didn't ask why. I just stepped aside and said, "Of course, sweetheart." He walked in slowly, looking around the house like it was a place out of time. The soft yellow curtains swayed in the evening breeze. The smell of cinnamon and lemon polish filled the air. He ran his fingers along the bookshelf, pausing at an old photo of his grandfather. "I like it here," he said finally. "It smells like peace." We had dinner together, simple soup, toasted bread, and stories I'd kept tucked away. He listened, really listened, with the same focus Jason once had as a boy before ambition made him deaf. Later that night, as Aiden slept on the couch, the orange glow of the streetlight brushed across his face. I watched him breathe, his chest rising and falling with a peace I hadn't seen in a child in a long time. For the first time in years, my house didn't feel empty. Outside, the world was still talking. Comment sections flooded with opinions, strangers argued about morality, pundits debated elder financial abuse. But here, inside my quiet home, none of that mattered. Justice had arrived not with sirens or shouting, but with silence and truth. Real justice, I learned, doesn't roar. It doesn't beg to be seen. It simply waits until someone finally looks in the right direction. The next morning, I made pancakes for Aiden. As I flipped them, he asked, "Grandma, are you mad at Dad?" I paused, spatula in hand. "No," I said slowly. "I'm not mad. Just finished." He tilted his head. "Finished?" "Yes," I smiled. "Finished with waiting for people to become what they promised they would be." He seemed to think about that for a while, then nodded. "I'm glad I'm here." "So am I." When the doorbell rang later, I half expected more reporters, but it was my neighbor, Jake, holding a basket of muffins. "Heard about your little internet fame," he said with a grin. "I figured you could use something sweet to balance it out." "Thank you, Jake," I said, laughing. "You always know when to show up." He nodded toward the living room, where Aiden was doodling in his notebook. "Looks like you've got company." "I do," I said softly. "And this time, the right kind." After he left, I looked out at the garden. The roses were blooming again, stubborn, bright, unapologetic. I thought of all the years I'd spent tending them quietly, believing patience was weakness. Now I knew better. Patience was strategy. They had called me useless. And yet, it was my quietness, my composure, my so-called uselessness that had built the loudest storm of all. I picked up my notebook, flipped to the last page, and wrote one line beneath all the others. They tried to feast on my silence, but I made silence the feast. Then I closed it, poured myself a cup of tea, and watched the morning sunlight settle across the table like forgiveness that had finally found its place to rest. It started with a letter, not a headline. A handwritten note from a retired teacher in Ohio who had read about me in the news. She wrote, "You made me brave enough to speak up. They ignored me at the board meeting for years. Yesterday, I finally stood and said my name. Thank you for reminding me I still matter." I cried over that letter softly, quietly, like rain against a window. And then I knew what I had to do. By spring, I founded a small organization called Gloria's Voice. It wasn't grand, Just a community project for retired educators, people who had spent their lives giving words to others, only to be silenced when they grew old. We held meetings in my living room, surrounded by coffee cups and lemon cookies. We shared stories. We remembered who we were before the world decided we were finished. Every donation came from strangers, small amounts, handwritten notes. For my mother, who taught me to read. For my grandmother, who was silenced too soon. Sometimes, I would sit by the window and whisper, "You see, Kay, I still have work left to do." One Sunday morning, as I was setting out tea for a visiting journalist, there was a knock at the door. I opened it and saw Jake, his gray hair combed back, his shirt tucked in like he had planned the moment for weeks. In his hands were a basket of pastries and a worn copy of Leaves of Grass. He smiled. "The town's been talking, you know. They say you've got an old lover named Jake living across the street." I raised an eyebrow. "Do they now?" He chuckled. "They're half right. I'm old. And I am very fond of you." For the first time in what felt like decades, I laughed. A full, unguarded laugh that made my chest ache in the best way. "It took me 81 years, I said, "to meet someone who doesn't make me feel like a burden." Jake set the basket on the counter and looked around my kitchen like it was already home. "Well," he said softly, "then let's not waste what's left." We started small coffee in the mornings, walks in the garden, evenings spent reading aloud. He fixed the leaky faucet. I baked pies. Sometimes Aiden joined us, carrying his sketchbook and a curiosity far too big for his age. At first, he was quiet, still bruised by the storm he'd escaped. But one afternoon, while helping Jake plant tomatoes, he said, "Grandma, do you think Dad hates me?" I wiped the dirt from my hands. "No," I said gently. "He just doesn't know what love looks like when it isn't about taking." Aiden thought for a moment. "Then maybe we'll teach him." We didn't speak of Jason or Crystal after that, not out of hate, but peace. Sometimes justice isn't about watching your enemies fall. It's about refusing to let them live rent-free in your heart. The months slipped by quietly. The garden grew. So did the laughter in the house. Jake and I held poetry nights for the teachers group once a month. We called them Evenings of the Unforgotten. Aiden would hand out programs, proud as a prince. One night, after everyone had left, Jake and I sat on the porch, the air smelling of lavender and new beginnings. He reached for my hand. "You did it, Gloria," he said. "You turned hurt into something whole." I looked out at the dark horizon where the stars hung low. "They used my name to pay for dinner," I said softly. "I reclaimed it to write my own ending." He smiled. "And what a beautiful ending it is." But I only shook my head. "No, Jake, this isn't the ending." In the window, I saw our reflections, two old souls, not broken but rebuilt. Behind us, Aiden slept on the couch, his sketchbook open, a drawing of the three of us under a tree. I thought about how life can be cruel, how people can wound you with the sharpness of their fear. But I also thought about forgiveness not as surrender, but as freedom. Because when you stop asking to be loved by those who despise you, you make room for the kind of love that heals. The wind brushed through the garden, rustling the pages of the open book between us. I closed my eyes, feeling its whisper. Maybe this was what peace sounded like. 6 months passed. The snow melted from the porch steps, the garden bloomed again, and peace had started to feel like a habit until the letter arrived. It came in a thick, white envelope, stamped Harlow versus Harlow. Jason was suing me. The claim read, "Public defamation, emotional distress, and fraudulent misrepresentation of assets." In simple terms, he wanted money and revenge. A week later, Crystal resurfaced too. She had reinvented herself online, posting videos where her tears sparkled just right under ring lights. In one, she sobbed into the camera saying, "My evil mother-in-law destroyed my life. She faked everything. I was the real victim." The clip went viral, mostly because the internet loves drama more than truth. Jake found me in the garden that afternoon, pruning the roses. "You've seen it?" he asked gently. I smiled. "I have. But I've also seen people like her before. They think noise is power." What Jason and Crystal didn't know was that one of my former students, Melissa Grant, had become a top civil attorney in Missouri. She had been the shy girl in the second row, the one who used to stutter when reading aloud. When she heard about my case, she called me herself. "Mrs. Harlow," she said, her voice steady with warmth, "you once taught me how to stand up for what's right. Now it's my turn." She took my case pro bono. At the hearing, Jason couldn't even look at me. His lawyer fumbled through claims that fell apart under questioning. Melissa moved like poetry, every sentence sharp, calm, undeniable. When it was over, the judge looked at Jason and said simply, "This is not justice, this is greed." The case was dismissed in under an hour. Crystal didn't fare any better. The defamation countersuit hit her hard. She was ordered to issue a public apology on the same platform where she had lied. Her voice trembled as she read the words. "I fabricated my story about Mrs. Gloria Harlow. I am sorry for the harm I caused." The comments section flooded with applause, emojis, and quiet satisfaction. That evening, Aiden ran home waving a paper in his hand. "Grandma, look," he said, breathless with pride. It was his school essay, stamped with a gold star. The title read, "The strongest person I know is my grandma." I felt the lump rise in my throat before the tears did. He smiled. "My teacher said everyone clapped when I read it." I pulled him close, my arms around his small shoulders, the warmth of his heartbeat steady against mine. "Some people never learn, Aiden," I whispered. But I did. I learned, silence is not kindness, it's a decision. Outside, the wind carried the scent of roses, and I knew this time it was the world's turn to be quiet.